Welcome to chapters 23 and 24 of our Civil War unit, Congressional Reconstruction and the South under Reconstruction. Thaddeus Stevens. He lived from 1792 until 1868. He began work as a lawyer in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, before being elected to the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. In 1848, Stevens was elected to Congress as a member of the Whig Party, but he only lasted one term because he opposed slavery. In 1858, Stevens was re-elected to Congress, now a member of the Republican Party. He was critical of Lincoln's slowness in making slavery the primary issue of the war. After the war, he believed that plantation owners' land should be taken away and given to freed slaves. He was President Andrew Johnson's primary rival in Congress. Congressional Reconstruction. After the election of 1866, the Radical Republicans controlled Congress, and they had enough votes to overrule Johnson. They wanted to both help give equality to the freed slaves and punish the South as harshly as possible. They also wanted to make sure it was in the Constitution so the South could not find a way to violate the rights of the freed slaves. In order to do this, they voted to reset everything, throwing out the new constitutions, the new laws, and the new congressmen. They then put the U.S. Army in charge of all the South until all the southern states were allowed back in. They then said that any new laws or constitutions had to be written by blacks and whites together, while no former Confederates could have any say. Three new amendments. During this time, three new amendments were added to the Constitution, granting rights to the newly freed slaves. The 13th Amendment, adopted December 18, 1865, outlawed slavery. The 14th Amendment, adopted July 9, 1868, granted citizenship and equality under the law for all former slaves. The 15th Amendment, adopted February 3, 1870, gave the right to vote to all male citizens regardless of race. Women would gain the right to vote in 1920 with the 19th Amendment. The Southern states had to ratify all three of these amendments in order to be reinstated into the Union. The impeachment of Johnson. Johnson and the Radicals were at odds over Reconstruction, and the Radicals worried that he would try to stop them. In response, they passed several laws limiting his powers. Believing them to be unconstitutional, Johnson ignored them, violating them in the process. The Radicals used this opportunity to impeach Johnson for his actions so they could remove him from office. In order for this to happen, both the House and the Senate had to vote and decide that he was guilty. For 2 months in 1868, Andrew Johnson was put on trial and many people came to see it. The House voted to impeach him, but when it reached the Senate, they fell one vote short, allowing Johnson to finish his term. African Americans in politics. Thanks to Reconstruction, African Americans had more opportunities. Many ran for political office, a first for the United States. African Americans held positions in each of the former Confederate states during this time, including as state legislators and even as lieutenant governor. Others were even elected to the House of Representatives and the Senate. Some of these men had lived freely in the North before the Civil War, but many of them were former slaves. Among those elected were Hiram Revels, Benjamin Turner, Robert DeLarge, Josiah Walls, Jefferson Long, Joseph Rainey, and Robert B. Elliott. Carpetbaggers and scalawags. Some Northerners moved south to work in government, hoping to either start a business or help the freedmen or to profit from the South's troubles. Southerners hated these Northerners, calling them carpetbaggers, implying that they had come to the South to get rich and fill their bags. Other government officials were Southerners who had been opposed to the Confederacy and the Old Guard and wanted to make changes. Southerners were also hostile to them, calling them scalawags, comparing them to small, worthless farm animals. Despite these names, both carpetbaggers and scalawags were able to make many improvements in the post-Civil War South. They helped rebuild many of the bridges, roads, and buildings that had been destroyed. They also helped to establish the first public school system in the South. Finally, they helped adopt the 15th Amendment, giving equal voting rights to the freedmen. The Ku Klux Klan. In 1865, the Ku Klux Klan was founded in Tennessee by 6 Confederate veterans. It was created with the intent of restoring white supremacy in the South. They wore white hoods and rode through the countryside to terrorize people. They were extremely racist and hated anything that had to do with giving blacks equal rights. They would beat up, whip, and sometimes even kill blacks or whites who were helping blacks. They would also burn schools, homes, and churches that blacks attended. By the 1870s, the federal government sent in troops to disband them. They later reorganized in the 1910s, and by 1925 they had almost 6 million members, but they faded in the 1940s. The Klan later terrorized blacks during the Civil Rights Movement, and today there are still a few thousand members, but they are under control. Undoing Reconstruction. Southerners did not like Reconstruction and did everything to fight against it. They refused to pay taxes because they did not want to fund schools for blacks. They also threatened blacks and prevented them from voting during elections. The North began giving up on the South, and by 1877 all federal troops were removed. Then the carpetbaggers, scalawags, and African American politicians were replaced with former Confederates. They then used their power to pass laws to limit all the rights of blacks, called Jim Crow laws, named after a racist vaudeville act. They passed segregation laws that separated blacks and whites in all public areas. They made impossible tests or other ridiculous requirements so blacks couldn't vote, and they denied them the right to a fair trial. While the Civil War had ended, blacks were still denied the rights Lincoln and the Union had fought for. They would not get many of these rights for 100 more years. Summary. The fight over Reconstruction almost led to President Johnson's impeachment, but it did pass the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. By the late 1870s, however, the South regained control of its states, and African Americans were once again denied the rights the Union had fought for. Please make sure you have all the terms and the summary written down.